to the people who will watch the video both today and over the next period of time. So as a little bit of background, we have spoken to Rod a few times, but obviously a New York Marathon winner, a Olympic bronze medalist, founder of Rod Dixon's Kids Marathon, which we're highly supportive of, and love having Rod along. And Erin Baker, New Zealand Hall of Fame member for sport, and I think 3 times world champion in triathlon. Am I accurate?
Well, it depends. Don't worry about it. Official, unofficial, different distances. Yeah.
And Scott Molina, known as one of the big 4, and sometimes it was hard because when I read some of the things it said the big 3, but also a winner of the World Ironman Championships in Kona, Hawaii. And as they've said to me just a bit earlier, they tend to have followed the sun, and it kind of looks like it. So well done on. I mean, you must both. 60, and neither of you look it, so that's quite inspirational as well. Where are you guys at the moment?
We are in Noosa in Queensland.
Right. And what's the normal temperature there at the moment?
It hardly gets below 20 here at this time of year, although it may get below 20 at some point in the next few nights.
Right. But you normally live in New Zealand? Is that where you're domiciled?
Yes, we've been living in Christchurch for the last 35 years.
Oh. And so, Erin, one of the things that we've kind of noted, whether it's been Rod or Lorraine Moller or the other people, Peter Snell, they grew up in small towns, which is almost counterintuitive, because you're thinking, well, if someone's going to excel in a number of fields, that sometimes competition's important. But I was really interested reading and watching parts of your story where you talked about your family being competitive enough in and of itself, and 8 children. And so can you kind of tell us a little bit about growing up in small town New Zealand and that environment?
Well, I mean, 60 years ago, I think everything was small town New Zealand, really.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, maybe not Auckland, but everything else wasn't all that big. But I mean, that was the times when you learnt to bike in the streets, and you learnt to bike by yourself. You know, you had a bike in the garage, and you just went up and down the street. You played hopscotch in the street. You walked to school. You walked to school by yourself quite early. Parents or the older kids would just be dragged behind them. And your games were all around the house. We used to dig up with a garden sort of course, jump off the little garage shed and into the patch of the garden and around the back. And so it was just, when you talk about it now, it does sound like olden days. And I guess it was. I mean, by virtue of the fact you could do those things, it's not so possible anymore. Nice, a few kids live on cul-de-sacs, but smaller properties. There was so much, there was freedom and there was activity were your playgrounds. We didn't get a television till, when I was older. And we also, my father built or helped build by virtue of just physical work, the first kaipoi swimming pool.
Oh, wow.
And so we got, I believe, if not free, the entry, basically free. And I can never even remember having swimming lessons. We just all learned to swim, So maybe there was somebody there standing on the side of the pool, sort of going, do this and do that. But in general, so it was just an easy life.
Were you the oldest?
No, I had 1, 2, 4 older sisters.
Wow.
So, and that was also a good position in a family to be, because, the older ones do the things wrong and get into trouble and da-da-da-da-da. But, by the time it gets to you, parents have sort of realised, whatever, go away, doesn't matter. boys, whatever, you know. So it's a nice, gentle place. Well-rounded, they would say, and if we went to see a shrink.
And Scott, you grew up in the United States.
I'll jump in right away here because my upbringing was very similar to hers.
Okay.
Seven kids.
Wow.
Catholic family, kids everywhere. You know, we played basketball, football, baseball in the street. You know, dozens of kids on my street, and same thing. We didn't have a TV until I was a teenager, and you know, so we were just outside doing stuff all the time, just running amok. And our parents were both so busy with the cooking and the cleaning and the washing and
earning money
that, you know, we were just free to do whatever we wanted to do. And luckily we didn't die, and we ended up, you know, we ended up pretty good at sport because of it.
Yeah. Rod, was that similar? Were you free ranged?
No, totally. Oh, yeah, free range. I like that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm following in with you guys, step by footstep. Fortunately, we lived on a very steep street called Taranaki Street in Tahunanui, and we could build trolleys, which didn't have brakes. And of course, we went down the end and into the bush at the end until we just kept getting higher and higher. And then, of course, someone had a pretty serious accident. So we weren't allowed to do it for 2 days, and then we're back again.
Yeah.
Excellent. Scott, where exactly in the United States did you grow up?
I grew up in a very industrial area that a lot of people don't think of when they think of California, but there's a big industry all throughout California. And I grew up on the Sacramento River in a little town called Pittsburgh, California. Mm-hmm. And my dad worked at the USS Steel Mill for a little while, and then he ended up working in a big factory called Dow Chemical for 35 years. And my mother, after I think even before our last child, number 7, Maria, my sister, was popped out, my mom started as a school bus driver. And so she was a school bus driver, and then she was the dispatcher in the office. So between those 2 jobs, she did that for 35 years.
The school bus driver role in Forrest Gump, that was based on your mother?
That was not, but
it could have been.
It could have been. She was a very lovely bus driver, and all the kids loved her. And I even rode on her bus, I think, for 1 year. And so she would just make sure everybody had their lunches and it had what they needed to, you know, to start their day. And she loved being a school bus driver.
Well, I mean, one of the things that when I traveled to the US that kind of pleasantly surprised me, and lots of things did, as I said to you a little earlier, I've enjoyed going there, but that those yellow school buses are a real thing. Yeah. And they still are. I mean, I figured they were just in movies from the 60s.
I'll tell you what I think about this school bus thing, because it's sort of interesting with Rod here, because when you had those initial interviews in the States, or wherever, States and Europe, when I started doing well, you know, Rod and John Walker and Lorraine and Alison, they're all, you know, stars. And people used to say to me, well, what is it about these Kiwis? Because these guys especially were right in the limelight then. And, you know, my standard answer was, I said, we don't have a bus system. We don't have a school bus in New Zealand. And I used to always simplistically, but more and more sort of believe it, is that kids were just more active. You got to school, as I said, by bike or walking or jumping and scooping and da-da-da. And I think that was one of the sort of contributing factors in those days to kids being much more active. Of course, now we have a school bus system, and it's called the, you know, SUV, and mummy dropping the kids off at the front gate every flipping day. Yeah, and that's changed everything.
I grew up in small town New Zealand too, and the person that I had to always work very hard to beat in any running race was the kid who who delivered the milk, and they used to run with the old milk trolley.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that guy, boy, was he strong.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure those opportunities are that prevalent for even delivering the old newspaper on the bike. So Erin, I saw that you did some radiography work. So did you both study post school?
I did. Yeah. I did radiography, qualified in that, went to work in Australia and during that time is when I got into triathlon.
And I was at university, married with one child, planning on studying toward med school when triathlon came along, and I just went, phew.
Wow.
And thought I was putting my studies on hold, which I have done for 40-something years.
Yeah. So it's interesting because in our heads we still think of triathlon in some ways as a new sport. But I noticed in doing the sort of reading last night that Kona actually began in 1978. And in one of the clips, I think it was, I'll remember the name in a minute. One of the guys said the reason he got into triathlon is because he just wandered down the street one day and there was a triathlon, and so he went in it, and that was him for life, really. And then the sport took off. So where on earth did Ironman come from? Because why would you?
Right. Well, there is some history to that. There was this guy, Mr. Collins, who started it in Hawaii. They had a Waikiki rough water swim, and then they had a around the island bike race, and then the Honolulu Marathon was already thriving at that time in the 70s. And so this guy decided to put them all together and create this event called the Ironman. And so that's where it all started in Hawaii, really. I mean, as far as the mass public perception of it is concerned, there were other little triathlons around the planet, but that was the one that sort of got the ball rolling, and then it really took off in California starting in about 81, and then just grew from there, really.
So those distances for Ironman, they were kind of the convenient distances from
They were
Is that really where it came from?
They were existing events. The Waikiki rough water swim was 3.8K. The around the Oahu island of Hawaii bike race was 112 miles, 180K. And the Honolulu Marathon was a marathon. And so that's how those distances became incorporated in the Ironman.
Wow. And then the other distances, so what you'd call standard distance or sprint distance, were they races that already existed and Ironman built on that, or were they kind of developing separately?
No, that was the brainchild of a California group that wanted to bring triathlon to the masses. And so if you think of the idea of a fun run to introduce people to running, right? When you first start running, you don't say, oh, go run a marathon. Most people don't do that, right? They start with smaller low-key events. And so that's what they wanted to try and establish in the United States. And so they did, and starting in 82 and with the US Triathlon Series, it was essentially an introduction to triathlon, and that took off. And then it took a couple years later, really, before they standardized the distance to what we now know as Olympic distance. That's what the guys in the Olympics do now, that distance. And so that really took off in about 84, and they were really off to the races after that, because those were distances that people, normal people could do.
So, Erin, one thing I saw that you fought for a little bit later on was the recognition of equal prize, equal recognition for women. But one thing that does strike me with triathlon was that, as opposed to running, which took this really long evolution, and we talked to Lorraine Moller about this, really long evolution before, say, Catherine Schweitzer, in disguise tried to run the New York Marathon, and and things like that, women seem to have got into triathlon and matched those distances relatively quickly in comparison. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is accurate, and Scott might be able to jump in a bit, but it was very accurate. I mean, I have been told off by a few women friends in a nice way, saying, well, it wasn't equal back then in some races. And I think someone reminded me that there was a race that the men's prize was $2,000 and the women's was $1,000. And they said, why did you do it? Well, it was very early in my career. And I was like, I couldn't believe there'd even be $1,000. And I also think that it was, thinking you were going to get anything at that stage was amazing. And also Scott pointed out that I probably did feel that race happened to be in Australia and all the big four from America were coming,
Right.
And it was a big deal. And I probably was humbled to even be able to be in the race, which sounds non-feministic, but these were the people that, were sort of breaking the sport to the world. But yes, in general, prize money got there very quickly. I don't know how well it did in the US as early, but I ended up being fortunate enough to race in the in Europe. And the biggest sponsor at the time in Europe actually selected me as their athlete, which again was unbelievably surprising. I wasn't a glamour woman. I was winning everything, but I was amazed that the person who was in charge of recruiting this, billboard person for Le Coq Sportif, and they were the main supplier of races. That was it. They got me. They paid me incredibly well.
Wow.
And prize money was equal from that day in their events. I mean, I was fortunate that that company, and more specifically, the sponsorship manager he was actually, you might know him, Rod. His name was Bernard Faure.
Yeah.
He was a French marathon champion. And so he ended up being the recruiter or manager, sponsor manager. And so he got me, and that was it. And then there were certainly the occasional events that it wasn't equal, and certainly they'd put, as I said in that interview, a car, it's equal prize money, but the guy will get a car. Things like that did occur, and I had a few events where they said, we're not paying equal prize money, but if you come, we'll give you equal. And that was very difficult because I didn't go to those events. But there's still a problem with equal prize money, and sometimes I actually have blamed the personnel themselves. I mean, I've been disappointed with women from time to time about the numbers, because I know that's a big issue, the depth or how many numbers. And, a woman will definitely say, well, all the numbers, that you just have to pay 20 deep for women to get the fields. I'm not sure that I actually now, after 20 or 30 years, thinks that that's the case. So anyway, I've strayed a bit, but I think we're fortunate in triathlon that money was there from the get-go.
I'll just jump in here for 1 second on that topic, Alvin. We women also had some incredibly forceful voices, advocates for women in the sport. One was Sally Edwards, who was on the board of this burgeoning USTS series in 1982. She said flat stick, she wouldn't be involved unless there was equal prize money. And then we had this event in Kauai, which was the home of a guy named Larry King, who was married to Billie Jean King. And he sat us all down and said, look, if you want this sport to go anywhere, you need a pro organization, and you need a strong voice, and you need women's advocates amongst you guys, the top athletes. And so the men also bought into it. We also from the beginning said, okay, it makes sense to build the sport professionally, and the women were much better looking in triathlon gear than we were. And so, we knew we needed to have the women have a presence.
So for that sport, so while Rod and John Walker and Dick Quacks and all these runners were amateurs, and having to, you know, book 3 flights to get to one place and sell them and all that sort of stuff. Rod's admitted to the skullduggery before. You guys were able to earn money from the beginning of the sport. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there was no national governing body. And I had, you know, done enough sort of running. I didn't ever think I was going to be a star in any, I didn't never consider that I was going to get to the Olympics as a swimmer or a runner. So I wasn't even a thought crossed my mind when, you know, first check came in that I wasn't going to take it. No.
Okay. So when you guys were growing up, and sorry to go back to that, but your sport didn't exist. So who did you look up to? Because when we've talked to others, of course, Rod can look back to Sir Peter Snell and he, you know, holds up his brother very highly as his, you know, as an athlete and a coach. And who did you guys look up to?
Let me start. It's hard for people to imagine now that there was no mass media, right? There was no internet, and so I was a kid swimmer. Then I was the kid runner, starting in 1974, and so my only connection with the outside world was Track and Field News, and then Runner's World came along just about then. And so I was reading about these guys being a running nut in California, and then started reading about Frank Shorter, of course, and then Bill Rogers. And so those were my heroes when I was a kid, and it was all through the magazines, and occasionally on TV, you know, maybe once a year or twice a year, especially if the Olympics were on. You know, my dad took me to the Olympics in 1976. I was actually in the stadium when John Walker won his gold medal. And I thought, that is the epitome of being a human being, you know, that is what I want in life. If God comes down and strikes me with lightning, that's what I'll do. And so no, I was tremendously influenced by the top distance runners of the 70s.
Nice.
And the same to me, New Zealand runners, you know, all of them. I thought I was blown away by them, you know, Rod, John, all of them, Dick Quacks, Lorraine Moller, you know, Anne O'Dane, you know, Alison Rowe, and Barbara Moore. They were just there. There was just so many of them, and they were great, and they were good role models. They weren't, you know, going and, I don't know, I won't say all the things that
it wasn't rugby league.
It wasn't rugby league. They were just, you know, it's great. They were performing great, and we were hearing about it. You know, obviously, you know, we were getting TV in the Olympics and this and that, and they were just doing everything you ever thought. And I do remember standing when I was a radiography trainee. I was standing and must have been watching or hearing the Olympics something. No, it was a New York Marathon. I said, and then Alison Rowe just won. I said, I'm going to do that one day. I'm going to do that one day. I mean, obviously I didn't, but, you know, similar-ish thing. Yeah.
Yeah, similar-ish. Like, yes, I've seen your best marathon being, what was it, 2:47 after.
Much faster than that.
Was it? No,
that was in a triathlon.
No, in the Ironman, but yes, and then a 2:33 at LA. So, yeah, those were amazing times, incredible times. I completed one marathon. That was enough. Let alone after. So, the sport obviously took off, and became competitive very quickly. How do you then, like, you earn your winnings, but how do you sell yourself as a business person in sport? How do you obtain your sponsors and represent your companies and those kinds of things?
Well, you know, I think Scott's always much more articulate than me, but, you know, there's a thing in life called intuition and natural instinct. You know, you just go about, you know, we got overseas, or I won an event, I won some money, you know, then it's someone like John Halleman says, oh, you should go here and do this or that. Yeah. And then, you know, you win, and you win well, and you win and do an interview, and if you're in France, you try and say merci or bonjour or something, it wasn't, it's not rocket science. It was just, of course you didn't, I was always very, very aware, even when I was doing races in New Zealand, that the sponsors, the companies were beer companies. And I was extremely uncomfortable about that. I was always, you might see, and I'm like, well, I've got to be good for the sponsor. Cross the finish line, they shove a bottle of beer in your hand, and I'm thinking, well, I've got to be good for the sponsor, but this is really not good, and it's not good if there's any kids. And so, people, that was one of the things. I think we had good intuition and just used our natural, strengths and thought about things practically. And so that, when you were winning, that's, maybe it's luck or whatever, but, sponsors came. And I've always had a bit of an issue, I used to, with young people coming to me and they say, well, I'm going to do triathlon, I want a sponsor. How do I get a sponsor?
Right.
Like, well, I tell you what, win a few races, do it well and do the right things, and there's a possibility it might happen. So that's my answer to that question. I was
a little bit more fortunate than Erin in that when the sport first started to come to the masses in the United States, a big sports marketing organization, IMG, decided that it looked like this was going to be the next big thing. And so they assigned a couple of sports agents to try and get into triathlon. And so I was represented by the biggest sports marketing company in the world, IMG.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate from a very young age, because I had no innate ability to do any of that stuff. And so I left it to them, and they did it very well.
Is that in the sport of triathlon, is that level of support still available?
You know more than me.
There are some agents that I know of, but I think it's past the initial growth and glory days of the sport, and it was probably similar to beach volleyball. When beach volleyball came on the scene, I remember there was just every company and
Right.
there was jumping into it, thinking this is the next great thing.
I think it could have been if they'd had 3 people on the court. I still think that 2 people out there kind of negates the game a little bit. But no one's listened to me on that yet.
But anyway, so triathlon had that sort of growth period for a while, where lots of companies were thinking this is the next great thing, and we want to get in there early on before it gets too expensive. Yeah.
So can you take us through, because Rod's talked to us about, running a marathon, and he particularly took us through running New York. And, it's the equal of anything, phenomenal effort. Your sport's different in that you're out there for, 8.5, 9 hours. Can you take us through what that feels like? Because I said I've done 2 or 3 half Ironmans, but anyone tells me that that's much less than half the pain. So please take us through an Ironman, and particularly that last part, Erin, when you had that incredible, I think, first win in Kona, and only hit the lead with a couple of K to go.
Well, it's when you are in tune with your body and you have all the right instincts to how, and you've done the preparation, all those things, how much energy you've sort of got. You feel it in your body, you feel it, and, so this is the whole thing about, being able to pace yourself and train, but so, I don't know, the Ironman is about getting to the marathon well.
Right.
For me. That's really the purpose, especially in an event, say like at Hawaii, where it's so hot. And so the rest of the event is about putting yourself in the right place with the right amount of energy to be able to do a winnable marathon. And like anything, at the absolute end of but whether it's I mean, when it's a marathon you've done in New York, or, I've done a few marathons, you're still just getting to the end. I think you're in a similar position with a few Ks to go. You're totally spent. You're trying to make sure that you try to keep that leg or that whatever from cramping. Every instinct is on fire to make sure that you don't just have that one breath too hard that puts you over the top and every cell in your body is in tune with getting you to that last point. And when you get to that last point, you inevitably are totally spent. But that's how I would sum up my sort of Ironman.
We gave Ethan Mitchell quite a hard time because his event takes 17 seconds, and even when he was in the team sprint, he made sure he was first. So the other guys had the harder thing, and I said, people, what are you thinking? And he said, well, I'm not.
No.
And so when you're swimming and then cycling, are you thinking the consequences of what's happening at the moment?
Yes.
Or you are?
All the time.
Right.
From the start of the swim, it's like, I'm not in the right place, and where are the people, where am I following, how's my breath, and have I, gone out and got, high pop, whatever those terms, I don't even know what they are, straight away, is my heart going too much, where am I, am I feeling good, am I on someone's feet, where am I going to get, how am I going to exit the water, where's my bike, how's my transition, and then the entire bike goes so fast, 5 hours, 4 hours, whatever they do it, an hour, 4.5, you're just thinking, where am I, how am I drinking, how's my body feeling, what's my time, where am I in the race? You never ever stop thinking. There's no, I wonder what we're going to have for dinner next Sunday. Never, not a second for it, no time for it.
Yeah. And because it was interesting, Rod, you talking through all of the calculating that you were doing in the last 10K of New York. And all the consequential thinking as well. How do I make up this gap, this real estate, etc.
Yeah, that's what's incredible to me is I was only doing it for 2 hours. Erin and Scott are doing it for 7 hours.
Yeah,
incredible.
So Scott, for you, what is it? Is that a similar process? Did you have a way of dealing with the pain?
I was probably a little bit more relaxed than Erin in that I was thinking about what should I be doing right now to get me through this thing as fast as possible. I was pretty good at staying in the moment, even though that was an 8-hour plus process. And I was also I would during the longer races, like the Ironman races, always think about the important people in my life, and remind myself that I wasn't on this journey by myself. That there was other people that I wanted to do well for. I felt beholden to and responsible to. So I always reminded myself of that, of those people. And even Erin, when she came back after giving birth to Miguel, I remember we put a little picture of our boy, our little baby boy, right on her handlebar stem, and she got to look at his picture while she was on the bike for 5 hours. And so I think we both would call upon, even if it was just a glimpse, only a moment. Call upon that strength that we drew from knowing there were other people with us on our journey.
I have a kind of anecdote to that as a teacher. So I think the third or fourth time I did the Tauranga Half Ironman, in that race, and you probably know of it, but if you're going to do about 4.5 hours, the sun seems to come out invariably with an hour to go. And so I'd done the first lap of the run, and I had to turn around and come back past my family. And I thought, I'll run past my family, I'll get to the end of Pilot Bay, and then I'll then said I'm quitting. And as I got to the end of Pilot Bay, a Mount Hobson middle school kids there, and he goes, "Come on, Mr. Paul, not long to go." And I was like, "Oh, stuff it. I'll run to the surf club." And I get to the surf club, and there's another one. So in the end, I ran out to the end for, well, I might as well go back and finish the race now. But yeah, and I'm still to this day, I think I probably would have just, wandered down and sat down and had a swim if that person hadn't been there in that moment. So that's an amazing story about your wee one. What age did you both say this is enough? Because it's a tough sport.
Well, for me, I wasn't much after 30, really, was it?
Well,
Miguel was my son, so.
But then she came back for a couple years after Miguel was born.
I came back for about a year after my son. I was ready to give it up by the time my son was born. I never saw this as being, my only part of my life, or that there wasn't going to be more things I would do. I enjoyed it, but not to the extent that Scott did, being the sort of person I am. And so I was, around 30-ish, 31, 2, and thinking, well, that's plenty. I'd won a lot of events by then. And I, tried to change my motivations for winning, because you need to. And then I was like, well, we wanted to have children. We made that decision and had a son, and was thrilled about that. And then I actually got an opportunity through Reebok, another sponsor, that decided to do, like a mothers and children thing, a woman in sport with children, or a woman thing, So they came to me and offered me a pretty decent contract to, do another year, and which I did. And but I might have stayed, but I just didn't want to keep doing it anymore. I just thought that's just enough. I don't want to keep going.
Nice.
Whereas I loved it, but I was getting quite worn out by the time I was 30, and just kept getting more and more worn out until I took a 93 off, actually, when Miguel was born, because I had so many injuries, and then came back for about two years after that. But even then, I was a broken down old warhorse by then, and really was ready to be chundered up into dog food. Really, I was just hopelessly injured by the time I hit 35.
Yeah.
Did you guys have? I've known. Cameron Brown's obviously a legend. Joe Lawn is fantastic New Zealand distance triathlete. What Braden Curry did a couple of weeks ago was pretty darn remarkable.
Yeah.
Lorenzo Bozzoni and several others. Have you had any impact back on those people? Are they people that have spoken to you? And I see Andrea Henson just chosen for the Commonwealth Games, which is pretty remarkable at 40 years of age, and given her stories. Yeah.
Well, I'll start.
You start this.
I was lucky in that because I moved to New Zealand permanently in '93. A number of pros contacted me over the years to help them with the program. Karen Balance was one. Debbie Nelson, who was a duathlete, was one. And Cameron Brown, after his first Ironman, was quite a wake-up call for him. He gave me a call, and so I was fortunate to work with Cam as his coach for I think almost 5 years.
Wow.
And then there were some other Kiwis along the way. Dylan McNeese is a good example. And so I've had a lot to do with the Kiwis over the years, and I have to say it's been one of the best parts of my sporting life was during those years helping young pros try and figure out how to get the best out of themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm completely the opposite. I think that because Scott absolutely loves the sport, still loves it, always did. I just had other things. I had children, which was, good. But I just had other plans. I had a, career, and then I ended up owning my own company, and I worked, really hard on that for a long time. And so triathlon was completely off my radar, in as much as, coaching people. I mean, I had a few people that would ask this and that, but I'm pretty intolerant of people not having done their homework before they might come and ask for advice. Whereas Scott's passionate about the sport and he's ready to, help and pull people up.
You sound a bit like Arthur Lydiard when I first went and spoke to him, and he'd tell me that he'd have this formula where he'd say to someone, well, you go and run the Waiteroo and come back and tell me if you still want me to coach you.
yeah. A bit like that, yes.
Yes.
So no, we thought one triathlete in the family was enough after all those years.
So we've been fascinated. So Rod took us back to Sir Edmund Hillary, and tremendous that actually, and I didn't know this until we spoke about Sir Peter Snell, but it was the same year that Peter Snell won in Rome that Sir Edmund Hillary visited Rod's school. So he was struck by lightning twice in that situation. And then, but we've also, placed some things in history. So we had Sir Brian Williams talk to us about, growing up in Ponsonby as a Pacifica family, and that was of huge interest to me as an educator because, he got a degree and became a lawyer and, all sorts of amazing things. But then he talked about going to South Africa, which I'm reading Tom Scott's biography at the moment. And it's still, even in that, those exchanges with South Africa, 1970, 1976, and 1981, are still pivotal parts. And adults are still asked, or even politicians, where did you stand in 1981? Do you want to tell us your story, because I found that so fascinating, and can leave out anything you want to leave out, but.
Well, first of all, it actually was part of New Zealand curriculum for several years, because I could almost put my watch to the fact that I'd get a school kid go, my mum tells me you were involved and I've got to do my full, school, whatever exams. Anyway, so the Springbok has definitely been part of New Zealand history. Look, it was a funny time. My mother was my mother's an amazing woman. She just passed away recently, but her theme probably in her entire life was equality and justice. Yes. My mother had looked at everybody anywhere on the planet in her own life, in her own backyard, as equal and wanted them to have equalness in life. Right. And she was prepared to sort of talk the talk or walk the walk, whatever people say. So she was, around the time of the Springbok tour, my mother was, of course, she'd actually done had engagements per se, telephone and by letter writing, with all sorts of people like Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu, who, years ago was on the, these were people of great mana, and my mother was very much into mana and even the Māori, use of mana. And so she was so aware of the Springbok tour, and to cut to a very quick chase, because there's a book I've just read. She went to America to see one of my sisters and absolutely was blown away that she ended up being on the same plane as the Springboks coming to New Zealand for the 81 tour. She had believed when she left New Zealand it would never happen because of the feeling and the uprising and the beginning of this real anti-tour movement. So she, on the plane herself, protested on that plane. She held up a sign and walked up and down the plane with shame after having also a few other altercations. Anyway, so she was a very brave woman, and my sister, was on the plane with her going, oh my God, So then she was very involved in a, peaceful part of the Springbok tour movement, or anti-Springbok tour movement. Just a lot of, writing letters, pamphlets, sitting in streets, going to, church gatherings and that. And I got involved under my mum being there all the time, and so I became a bit more involved in a bit more of a, how would you say, militant level. Yeah. And that level was a bit more sort of civil disobedience. And I ended up always being on marches and stuff, but then getting arrested a few times, once in particular for doing something at a Nelson game. It was called throwing an incendiary device. I got convicted of it, which led me sort of to have problems later on getting to America. I didn't actually throw an incendiary device, but I did do something else, which I talked about in that spin-off show. But yeah, we were very much that this shouldn't happen and these games shouldn't go ahead. I mean, at one stage we trained to pull the crossbar off the posts. So we went into one of the games and we'd been training at roping over them. Anyway, didn't happen, but it was, you know, I mean, I was swept along by it. I was swept along, you get more swept along by the injustice of apartheid. And so that was sort of how that all came about.
Yeah, so I mean, particularly for the children and families, I mean, it is a remarkable time to think back to, and that one game was stopped in Waikato, but it still seems almost inconceivable that the Eden Park test continued with a small plane flying backwards and forwards above the park, dropping flower bombs. And it was like, how easily could something have gone significantly more wrong?
Yes.
And yet the game continued. The game must go on.
Yes.
I
mean, there was the time people were saying, you know, politics and sport shouldn't mix, and you know, everyone will still have their own view on politics and sport, because of course politics and sports everywhere. We only have to look at the whole situation in Russia and Croatia right now.
Yes.
But I think our feeling and our family and the people that, you know, mainly we're involved in, is that, you know, one, that you always should use your platform. If you have a platform, if you're given that opportunity, then you should use it well. Hopefully you would try to use it well. And that, you know, injustices need to be, you know, brought to the attention, you know, wherever they happen and however one can do it. And so, but that tour, they were, you know, obviously at the time the government and that was determined that that tour should go ahead. And, you know, it's, maybe it's good that it did. Maybe in the end it's good that it did, because there was so much highlighted about New Zealand and how New Zealanders, you know, cared about other people, and that we felt that apartheid was wrong, and maybe, you know, that, you know, that was played an instrumental part in, you know, the apartheid system coming down. You know, who knows? You can look at things, you know, all ways, but I tend not to look backwards. I think forward, and I think we look at it now as a, you know, a positive bad tour.
Yes, well, I mean, that's certainly, I think, what Sir Brian Williams talked about, really, and he felt that if you look, to phrase it this way, the New Zealand coloured players had actually had quite a significant influence in South Africa by showing that, you know, they were quality people and they could challenge things as well. And I think Rod talked about the irony of the year before he'd missed out on being able to go to Moscow and race, because at that stage it was apparently appropriate for politics and sport to mix. So interesting times. So Scott, you're both, you know, formidable people, you know, remarkable people. Forgive me for being a romantic, but who first said to who, I quite like you. Could we have a cola together? I mean, you know,
I take credit for that. One of my braver moments in my life, because I was aware of Erin's reputation as a tough, gnarly bitch, and we were single at the time when I met her at a race, and I bumped into her in an elevator, and I said, "Hey, hello, would you like? Or have you had breakfast yet? You know, how about we have breakfast together?" And so that's how we started.
Excellent. Good story. And you've now lived in New Zealand since 1995. Are you a dual citizen, or?
Oh, I'm a Kiwi passport holding human now. I changed, and it wasn't just because of Trump, but that sort of pushed me. That gave me the last little nudge that I needed to change passports. So no, I'm a full-fledged Kiwi now.
And you enjoy the country. So what? So Erin, I've seen that you had a stint in politics. I think John Helleman's the Dutchman that he is, and I love Dutch people because my wife's half Dutch and your father came from Holland. Very honest people.
Well, that's why you get on so well with them. That's why I got on so well with John.
John said you were almost too honest for politics. What does that mean?
Oh, look, I was a dreadful politician because being diplomatic is actually a skill, which means holding your mouth, waiting to the right opportunity, which might be hours, days, weeks, or months away. Not my sort of modus operandi. I like to say what I think then and there, and so the whole process just drove me batty. Let's just put that off to another day. Let's just have another morning tea break, or dinner tea break, or a lunch break, and just the way that the interaction with staff and the manipulation behind the background, it just was not me at all. So I always just said what I thought, which it took me a long time to realize that shocked people. My husband was trying to tell me that for a long time.
She did last 5 years.
Wow.
As a Christchurch city councillor, but that was about 4 years too long.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then your business that you speak with pride of, so what did you work at as your main business?
I got into orthopedics, so I worked for a company that orthopedic implants, as in hips and knees and stuff. So I worked for a company for quite a while, and then I started my own company in New Zealand, and for about 10 or 12 years, and sold that last year. So I was involved with theatre work, hip and knee replacement and shoulder replacement, and I loved it.
Are you both still working? What's life involved now?
I don't even. I do advise a few people, but I don't call it work. What I do, mostly it's older age groupers. I don't work with pros anymore, and so it's not very serious, and it's not a lot on the line. And she is well and truly retired.
Done.
And so you're enjoying recreation, enjoying travel, and looking forward to post-COVID travel?
Well, we're already in Australia, and when we go home, we're going back to the States. Our son's there.
Yes.
So we'll go there for 6 weeks or so, and then
my folks are there,
and his folks are there actually. Yeah, so we're going to meet up with them. We haven't seen them as a family for a couple of years, and then at this stage we're going to Europe, but we'll see what happens on the Ukraine front, really, because we're meant to be going to Slovakia for a triathlon thing, actually.
Wow.
So but we'll see what happens.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate your time. But appreciate your lives, actually, and I think that's one of the things that as we're talking to people, that, and as I've always said to children, even not including you guys in this age group, but when you walk down the street or you walk down the beach and you see an elderly person, don't see the elderly person. See.
You're saying we're elderly.
I know. Use that. But often we even think of sports people as being one-dimensional, and as we're talking to people, and I spoke to you earlier of my son's experience with Sir Peter Snell for a weekend, and just almost the kind of aura that the man had as a man, not as a one-dimensional person, and that range of experiences. And I think, speaking to people like yourselves, a lot of our children and families are being inspired to live full and remarkable lives. And so, your time is well and truly appreciated.
Just before you hang up on us, I used to say this because I never get the opportunity, like when like with Rod sitting there, because I've only had, I think I twice I saw you, once when I had that Drake 5K series in Auckland, you remember that? Yeah, and one other time, and you never get to, like, we loved when we lived in Boulder, one of the persons that we enjoyed being most around in Scotland was Robert Di Costello. Right. And we loved that era of athletes and the people they were, and we just used to love sitting around and talking with Greta Waits and Ingrid Christensen and chatting about them, and it's, you don't actually, in New Zealand, it's funny enough, I haven't had very many of those opportunities. I saw Lorraine last year for a bit, and that was lovely. But it's sort of nice to have me to be able to say what a huge influence people like Rod were in our lives. And it's only when you talk about it later, you actually realize, because you put all the pieces together about how you become to be and what you became.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the network, you know, I loved it, and he became probably my best friend for a time period, Jack Rolston, who, you know, and all of the connections with Jack, having sort of coached these athletes, and Rod spoke at Jack's funeral, and there is an amazing connectivity, but I also think there's so much kind of learning to come from it, that and one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing is a few years ago at one of our schools in Auckland, we actually brought in Kevin Mialamu, and it was 2 years after Kevin having been a remarkable All Black, and the children didn't know who he was, and it really took me back and to go, what's happened, and honestly, it's as simple as pay-per-view television. And the growing inaccessibility, and the stories are remarkable. So we made a habit in our schools of asking people in, and I'll never forget having Dr. Mark Orams come in and speak to our kids, and you know, the sailing professor, as they call him now, in the America's Cup, and he travelled with Sir Peter Blake, and he came in and just told these remarkable stories to our children. And in the end, I said, as he was leaving, I said, Mark, why did you come in? And he said, well, because you asked. He said, you'd be surprised how many people don't ask.
Well, I hope New Zealand and people like yourself and other, you know, people that have a broad influence, that they get to those ski kids. You know, those ski kids are going to be the next lot of kids. I mean, they might seem privileged because their sport appears to be privileged. You know, we think skiers, but those kids are just the real deal. They're just hardworking Wanaka kids that, you know, have, and they won't realise the influence they have yet, but kids get those kids out of their TVs and off their phones and just go out in the snow or whatever, and just go out and run around the streets, because you can still do that. You can still run around the bloody streets, you know, so it's all simple stuff to start with. But those young skiers, I just think we need to, you know, promote them as such awesome role models, even while they don't realise they are. They're too shy at the moment and too, you know, humble.
Yep, sounds excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Rod.
Well, Rod, come and see us in Aroa.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, be nice.
I'll write it down up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.